Ahlan wasalan and shalom. My name is Josh Goldberg, and I'm the Education Director for Inside the Middle East. We offer an authentic, apolitical, non-partisan education about the Middle East. We educate through articles, briefings, books, courses, videos, and voices from the region. We equip individuals, students, educators, professionals, and leaders to think critically and ask better questions. We empower communities to replace sound bites with substance and polarization with perspective. This spring, we launch our next cohort of our fellowship. Our fellowship is an unparalleled, immersive, and interactive educational experience designed to equip undergraduate, graduate students, and young leaders with the knowledge, skills, and resources to explore the complexities of the Middle East. The fellowship's goal is to empower participants to think critically, bridge divides, and confidently initiate meaningful conversations that inspire understanding, drive informed dialogue, and lead to impactful change. We still have a few spots left in our upcoming spring fellowship, so if you know any passionate undergraduate, graduate students, or young leaders, please encourage them to apply. Our application window's soon. We'll put the application link in the chat. Today is an appetizer of what our fellowship has to offer. We have an expert panel of partners from the region to address the challenges. Welcome. Inside the Conversation, Voices from the Middle East, with Avi Melamed, Avi Buzo, Dalia Ziada, and Hussein Abdul Hussein. Together, they bring insider perspectives, lived experience, and deep regional insight. Today, we will discuss the following questions. What's really happening across the Middle East today? Where is the region heading? And how is Western discourse shaping it all? We welcome and encourage questions, so please submit them through the Q&A, and they will be answered during the program. It is my pleasure to introduce ITME founder Avi Melamed to begin the conversation. Avi?
Avi is muted.
Avi, turn on your mic, Avi.
I hope that you can hear me now. Okay, you say that, and it means they can hear me. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Josh, thank you for this very nice kind introduction indeed. I'm very excited to host today some of our distinguished colleagues and experts to talk about the region. You know, these very days, I'm in the midst of a long lecture tour across North America. And one of the things that I've come across with all of my encounters with the wide audience is the whole issue of peace in the Middle East, particularly in the context of President Trump Gaza peace deal. So we would like to explore today in our conversation that aspect, as well as we are trying to focus on a couple of very, I would say, relevant arenas at this point. To that end, we are honored to host today some leading experts in different perspectives. We are joined today by Ms. Avi Buzo. She is the co-founder and the executive director of Yalla's Productions, and she is the co-editor of Middle East 24 News. We are also honored to host today Mr. Hussein Abdul Hussein, a research fellow at the Foundations for the Defense of Democracies. And hopefully we are going to be joined later soon by Ms. Dalia Ziade, ISGAP, Washington, D.C. coordinated. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. We are very honored to have you with us today. I want to start with you, Hussein, and I want to focus immediately in one of the most significant arenas in the region, Lebanon. By the way, today, in a very significant dramatic timing, there has been a very dramatic event in Lebanon today. Israel eliminated Hezbollah's top military commander, Ali Tabtabai, which of course resulted in a lot of growing tension with a lot of question marks what's going to happen. So I would like Hussein to explore with you this whole issue of the peace concept, and particularly in the context of the discussion about the Lebanese arena as it is right now.
Hi, Avi. Thanks for having me on. Hello, everyone. Let me start by just trying to explain the structure or the template of all these, what we call the peace plans. And when we say the word peace here in the West, we usually understand peace, the end of war, and people becoming friends and peaceful and exchanging visits and culture ideas and whatnot. This is not how most of the people in the Middle East understand peace. The structure and the template of peace, especially between people who consider themselves to be Muslims, and today we call them Islamists because they bring Islam into politics as opposed to the regular Muslims who are just Muslim believers who don't bring Islam into the political war. So today, Islamists, which are clearly a majority in the Middle East, think of any peace treaty as a truce. And this truce is structured after a truce in history that they imagine Prophet Muhammad held with his enemies. And it was a 10-year truce, and after which he beat his enemies and conquered Mecca. So all of these organizations, whether Hamas or Hezbollah, all of these Islamist organizations, this is how they understand peace. And by the way, it's not only the organizations, even the majority of Egyptians and Jordanians. Egyptians have been at peace with Israel. They ratified their peace treaty back in 1979, and Jordan in 1994. And even though both countries have embassies with Israel, you don't really see Egyptians or Jordanians really touring the cities of Israel, and vice versa. So the understanding here is that this is not war, but this is not exactly peace. With Islamist organization, they take this truce to a whole new level. And to them, it only means a ceasefire. So not even a truce. And even a ceasefire, now they stopped calling it ceasefire. Now they call it cessation of hostilities. What happens is that whenever there's war between Israel and any one of these groups, like the one that Hamas started on October 7, 2023, Hezbollah joined on October 8, 2023 in support of Hamas. And this war, Israel clearly prevailed over the two of them. And at one point in last November 2024, the Lebanese said, enough, we're willing to get out of this. And Israel, which was ahead of them at the time, which is prevailing and beating them at the time, Israel said, okay, we are willing to stop the war, but you have to disarm Hezbollah. And if this happens, we can do whatever you want. Truce, peace, ceasefire, just the shooting stops. So the Lebanese government signed on the cessation of hostilities on November 27, 2024, and they pledged to disarm Hezbollah. Now, today we're November 17, 2025. It's been almost a year since the Lebanese government signed the treaty. The cessation of hostilities, I'm sorry, it's only a deal. And Hezbollah is still armed. Not only Hezbollah is still armed, Hezbollah is rearming. And all this year, Israel has been saying, listen, we will stop policing Hezbollah when you guys, the Lebanese government, take care of it. As long as Hezbollah is not disarmed, as long as Hezbollah is rearming, we will have to police Hezbollah. Otherwise, we'll have to wait until Hezbollah is strong again, and then we will go into full-scale war with the pro-Iran militia again. So this is why, even though there has been a cessation of hostilities between Lebanon and Israel, you still see something like today when Israel killed the chief of staff of Hezbollah, the top military guy. And technically the top guy, because the secretary general is really a puppet kind of talking head. He's not really the one who's running Hezbollah. Naim Qasim is not running Hezbollah. So you'd be surprised, because you always think, well, we thought there was a ceasefire between Lebanon and Israel, and look at Israel now killing this guy. Israel is violating the ceasefire, the cessation of hostilities. That's not really the case. And the same thing is happening in Gaza. The reason why Hamas agreed to the cessation of hostilities in Gaza was because the whole world, and most importantly, Turkey and Saudi Arabia and the big Islamic countries, got behind the ceasefire. And Hamas could not but agree to President Trump's peace plan. Now, President Trump calls it a peace plan. I don't think it's anywhere near peace. It stopped the shooting, and Hamas agreed to release the Israeli hostages, the dead and alive. I think there are still 3 Israeli bodies still with Hamas, but we expect Hamas to find them and release them to the Israeli side soon. But that's it. And Israel is still in control of 50% of the Gaza Strip, and Hamas controls the rest of the Gaza Strip, and Hamas maintains its military organization and arms. And given that that's the case, from time to time, Israel will have to stop this armed guy from infiltrating that point, or this, armed group to launch this attack. So even though we have a ceasefire, you still hear from time to time some killing, some bombing, some sort of military confrontation, and people tend to blame Israel and say, you guys, you just never stop. Oh, this is not really the case, because no one really took the agreement to its end, which stipulates stopping, disarming Hezbollah, disarming Hamas. This has not happened. So what we have is a tenuous ceasefire. And I'll stop here.
Yes, thank you, Hussein. Indeed, particularly against the background of the information coming today from Lebanon, the elimination of Hezbollah's chief of staff, there are some concern that actually what we are going to see is the flare of a direct Israeli-Hezbollah collision, even though I would say that at least according to the last couple of hours, when I'm trying, of course, to follow the different sources in the region, it seems like, and I'm saying it very consciously, that the Hezbollah at this point will refrain from involved in a direct collision, but it's definitely, I would say, deepening the crisis of the Hezbollah politically, militarily, and I would say not less significant in the context of its deterrence image that has been significantly compromised, particularly following the collision with Israel in 24. At this point, I would like to turn to you, Avi, and actually, there is something about what Hussein basically presented that has to do with some very challenging aspect of the region, and this is the whole issue of the power struggle between state and semi-state, the mentality of militias that has been scattered, particularly in this region, and the challenges it results in the context of the chances to move forwards towards what people in the West would call peace. And what Hussein very clearly explained, it's something very much different from the Western mindset. So what is your perspective on that issue as one who is covering constantly the discussion within the people of the region, on the social media, on the news, and so on?
Absolutely. First of all, thank you so much, Avi and Maya. So happy to join you again. And hi to everybody who's joining. And look, I think that when you're talking about the Middle East, is such a complex region, Middle East, North Africa, that even, when you talk about like a country like Syria, for example, you're talking about like 4 different parts that have completely different realities and issues and challenges and circumstances. I think Lebanon is similar. Of course, Iraq is similar. Hussein mentioned Jordan and Egypt. Those are like they're distinct examples, right, of places where radicalism is actually thriving on a popular level. But in terms of this the militias that were backed by Iran and continue to be backed by Iran, that have basically occupied 4 capitals across the Middle East, from Baghdad to Damascus to Beirut and Sana'a and Yemen. We know that there is this, really awful reality that those countries have faced. And I want to say something about what happened at one point in history. And we know that this was a turning point, which was October 7th. So October 7th was a turning point, I think, for Israel, for the Jewish people. But also it was basically a turning point for the entire region, because we know that on October 8th, Hezbollah and the Houthis and also Hezbollah and Iranian-backed elements were actually attacking Israel from these different countries. But at the same time, we know that this turning point happened when Israel was like, okay, we're going to take out these elements. We're not going to allow these terrorist groups to just kind of roam around freely anymore. Israel was having more of a campaigns before to just kind of limit the abilities and the basically military capabilities of the Iranian-backed militias in Syria and all of the kind of the backers of the Assad regime. And for people who don't know the Assad regime, it was a horrific dictatorship, bloody regime that is basically completely in bed with the IRGC, the Iranian regime, and all of those militias. Hezbollah was pretty dominant in Syria. Hamas and the Islamic Jihad, they have headquarters in Syria. So what happened is that when Israel basically took out those elements in Syria that were backing the Assad regime on the ground, Assad collapsed and the Assad regime is gone. I don't think a lot of people pay attention to how massive and how big this was for the region, of course, for Iran to weaken it and the weakness of all of these different elements. Now, the issue is that we still have the remnants and like basically in Lebanon, Hezbollah still there is weakened. We've seen that there is a different language that we're hearing from the Lebanese government. We know that in Syria, the Iranian-backed militias are very completely almost gone, but not really completely gone. So like they're not as powerful as before. They still have some remnants places, but they're much smaller cells. But there's, of course, they would try to resurface and to be re-empowered. And what we have is that on top of the Islamic regimes and Iran's backed elements, we have the Muslim Brotherhood, which are basically the second face to the same coin. And they do cooperate. So in Syria, what happened is that we've had the Turkey and Qatari influence that empowered the Islamists in Syria. And because of that, we saw that what happened after the Assad regime fell is that the Islamists were the ones to become the most powerful ones. But now we have a reality that like these, so the old regime is gone, for example, Hezbollah is weakened, but the money, the support from the Qatari, who are supporting Muslim Brotherhood, Turkey, who's continue to try to empower these Islamist elements, for example, in Syria, and of course, Iran that continues to want to have these relationships. And we know that in Iraq, the Iranian-backed militias are still the most powerful until today. This presence is actually the major and the most obstacle for peace, the biggest obstacle for peace. So look, in terms of the reality, I know that the United States, we want to like have peace deals. We want to stabilize the Middle East. But I think the reality on the ground is not a place where you can say, yes, let's have a peace deal and yeah, let's make it happen and let's, everything is going to be great afterwards. I want to add to what Hussein is saying. We are in a reality right now in the Middle East where it's transitioning. I think the situation, we are seeing definitely the weakening of these Islamist radical elements that have ravaged the region. But the fight is not over. And the one party that's been consistent in fighting these radical elements within the region is Israel. And I think this is like the kind of what people don't talk about, like the elephant in the room. The Lebanese, the public in Lebanon, the people who talk, even within now the government who are feeling empowered, they feel so because that they know that Israel is going to continue to take out Hezbollah, like militancy capabilities, commanders. Today we saw another example. The same thing in Syria. The Druze in Syria, they look towards Israel. They hold the Israeli flags because they know that Israel has been the one to basically protect them from what could happen. We have the Kurds in Syria. We have the Alawites in Syria. We have even the Christians. I have a Christian friend from Damascus. Basically, she told me she's never been somebody who was into politics in general. But I'm just trying to explain to you what's happening on a public level. She basically told me that her parents said, we feel safe because we know Israel is here and that Israel would basically prevent the Islamists from killing all the Christians. So it's basically, this is the reality right now that is happening. And I think that, for the United States, I think we need to be more, pushing towards peace is a positive thing, but I think that we have to work with our partners, with our allies like Israel, to actually make it and to an actual sustainable peace that is based on realities and not wishful thinking. And I think that's what I'm hoping that things will be, pushed towards in the future.
Yes, Avi, thank you. I mean, indeed, you mentioned this thing, the weakening of what is known as the Iranian-backed axis of resistance, which we basically refer to in the intelligence language as what we call the domino effect, starting in October 7. And I want to connect the final statement that you made about the understanding in the West, realistically, the prospects of peace. And I want at this point to turn back to you, Hussein, and focus for a minute in the story of Lebanon, because Again, based upon my encounters here with different audiences, there is a lot of lack of knowledge of the real big stories that goes on in Lebanon, and particularly this whole thing of the struggle of Lebanon to restore, in a way, sovereignty, or maybe that sovereignty didn't really exist. So can you please a little bit explain to us what is today the current power struggle inside Lebanon over this whole thing of the sovereignty, and why is it so significant in the context of the odds for progress towards what we call peace?
Well, that's a great question, Avi. Let me just add to it the two questions that I saw in the box. Number one, about the Lebanese government, it is legitimate. The parliament is elected every 4 years. This president was elected by parliament. Cabinet is formed under the parliament by the president. So the whole structure is very legitimate. Lebanon is one of the few countries that maintains election periodically, and this is one of his assets. However, being legitimate does not always mean being competent, especially if you have, like Avi said, if you're sitting in Syria or Lebanon and you're thinking, well, I don't have to be scared, Israel will come to our rescue. This creates complicity on the part of the Lebanese, on the part of some Syrians, on the part of some Gazans. And you're thinking, if Israel's going to do the job and disarm Hezbollah, why should I stick my neck out as a politician who'll be running for election? I might lose some votes in Lebanon if I go after some Lebanese Hezbollah. So this is where domestic politics intervene with good policy. And good policy means if you are a state, you have to be in charge of every violence that originates in your territory toward anybody, whether domestic or abroad, whether across your border or in your backyard. What the Lebanese don't get is that they never behave in a way to take ownership, to show agency. And when they don't do that, they force Israel to do it for them. And Israel, number one, Israel doesn't do it for free. Israel really, sacrifices troops who die. So Israel also has a domestic opinion that's not really willing to go to war every couple of years. That's why Israel tries to have, one big war to buy itself some peacetime. And number two, Israel has to pay a lot of money for these wars. These wars do not come for free. And number three, Israel will have to take a lot of heat from the international community, because everyone with a camera phone shows destruction, and Israel suddenly is committing genocide and ethnic cleansing, and you name it. So these things are not easy. These governments, what Israel is saying all the time, and they're telling the Lebanese, listen, Hezbollah is too powerful for you. We will give you a hand in disarming Hezbollah, but then there's a last mile that only you can do. It's you, only you. You have to do the last mile, because if you don't, it means that Israel will have to get into the mess, get engaged into a ground troop invasion, and this is never easy, and this is always really hard to deal with. So, and this brings me to the second question in the chat box, and this question was, what will Israel do next? Will it go into Gaza or not? I don't think Israel likes to go into Gaza. I think Israel would love to withdraw of what's remaining of Gaza. Most of Israel, that is, if you take the small crazy factions out. But most of Israel would like to get out and would like to have a Palestinian Authority that can deliver, that can say, listen, if any violence comes from our side to your side, we're on top of this. We'll punish the people who commit this violence. And if this happens, Israel unlikely go into any kind of war with Palestinians or the Lebanese. So you have the same model here, Avi. It's in Lebanon and it's with the Palestinians. Governments sign on documents, whether it's Arafat and the Oslo Accord, or it's the Lebanese and this cessation of hostilities. They sign on pledges, and a few months after the pledges, they start saying, well, look, we will not disarm Hezbollah because you, Israel, are policing us, and because you, Israel, have not withdrawn from 5 Lebanese hilltops that are strategic.
Right.
The point here is that the domestic politics of the Lebanese In the case of the Palestinian, it's more than domestic politics. You add to it the Islamists of Qatar and Turkey, and then you add the direction that Saudi Arabia is pushing, and you add the U.S. Public opinion and domestic pressure on the administration, protests on campus. You factor all of this together, and then good luck figuring out which direction anyone can take. So the issue here with the Lebanese is that they're not moving. And I personally take a lot of heat as a pundit who lived in Washington, and more often than not, I write and advocate for the Lebanese, giving the Lebanese a chance. I say, listen, let's give them a few months. If they do it, fine. If they disarm Hezbollah, fine. If they don't, then resume the war. And everyone challenges me, and they say this has been tried and it didn't work. And I think, and this will be my last point on this, this has been tried truly. In the case of Lebanon, forget the Oslo and the Palestinian Israeli complications. In the case of Lebanon, in the year 2000, Israel withdrew out of South Lebanon. And the UN sent a committee, and the committee drew something that looks like a border. They called it the Blue Line. And also Kofi Annan came to the UN Security Council, and he certified that Israel was in compliance with UN Security Council Resolution 425, which stipulated at the time that Israel must withdraw. So Israel was in compliance with UN resolutions on Israel versus Lebanon. And after that happened, Israel said, listen, this is your country, good luck, we're getting out. The only thing we want is that don't throw stuff at us, don't throw rockets on us, don't kill our people. 2006, Hezbollah started a war that, everyone knows about that war, the 2006 33-day war that ended in a stalemate. 2023, Hezbollah again started a war, this time to support Gaza. So you see, what's going on is that whenever Israel says, okay, we're getting out of your hair, good luck figuring out your country, the other side, in this case Lebanon, did not live up to its promise. Now what you see now is, again, cessation of hostilities signed. The Lebanese, instead of disarming Hezbollah, they're going after Israel and blaming it for policing Hezbollah that they're not disarming. So I'm not sure that I know the answer to this. I'm not sure I have a plan that I can say, hey, Avi, this is the plan, do it, and everything will be sorted out. There's none. Unless the Lebanese step up, I don't see really anything other than the muddling through and Israel policing until something changes.
Yes, in fact, Hussein, you are presenting here a picture that has been discussed among many analysts in the Arab world, this whole challenge of a state within a state, where actually you got a state that has the formal structure like government and so on and so on, but basically there are local players that having their own independent military might, like in the case of Lebanon, we are looking at Hezbollah, to actually dictate their agenda and foreign agenda, in the case of Hezbollah, the Iranian one. Avi, at this point, I want to go back to you and shift it to another interesting development, which, again, in my lectures and meeting with people, it's something that people are very much intrigued about. Recently, we had something that was, I would say, a couple of months ago, even almost unthinkable. And that is the fact that the new president of Syria, Ahmed al-Shara, was visiting the White House and meeting President Trump. Many people are intrigued about the story of al-Shara, and there are some good reasons to be intrigued about it. So what's the story with Ahmed al-Shara that used to be known in previous lives, sort of speaking, as Abu Muhammad al-Julani, and why people are so debating about this whole thing in Syria?
Yeah, I mean, like I kind of started to talking about the fact that the Islamists were the ones that were empowered. And Al-Jolani, who's now his real name is Ahmed al-Shara, was basically the head of HTS, which is an affiliated group with Al-Qaeda. He also was part of ISIS at one point. So, of course, it's very puzzling. It's really, I mean, it's almost like you would like, is this really happening? And with who? With President Trump? He's meeting with President Trump. It's unbelievable. But we have to see the whole situation in Syria, right? So we are coming out of the Assad regime, which was bad in every sense of the word, including the fact that he supported Al-Qaeda historically. The Assad regime and the Iranian regime basically trained, funded, and armed and sent Al-Qaeda fighters into Iraq to kill hundreds of thousands of Iraqis and thousands of American soldiers. So that was the Assad regime. Now we have this new person who's basically saying, oh, I'm no longer a jihadist and I am somebody who wants to reform and who wants to. Do I trust that? No. I think that what we need to do is that we have a reality right now in Syria. We have a weak government in Syria that already has a lot of people who feel this way towards them. They are skeptical, including Sunnis, by the way. So I want to just kind of give our attendees a little bit more background. So in Syria, there's Alawites that the Assad regime were part of that community. It's a small minority that is based mostly in the coast. We have the Druze community in southern Syria. There is an ancient Jewish community that was completely dismantled under the Ba'ath Party and the Assad family, the Assad regime, through systematic abuse that happened. And you have the Kurds that were they had their autonomy during the uprising against the Assad regime that turned into a civil war. And the Kurdish forces, the SDF, were basically fighting alongside US forces against ISIS. And then you have, the kind of the Sunnis who, of course, were very happy that they're no longer ruled by the Assad regime because they were being slaughtered based on the fact that they were Sunnis, alongside, the Assad regime, Alawite groups, Shiite groups like Hezbollah and the IRGC-backed militias were slaughtering people because they're Sunni. So that said, now you have this very fragmented Syria. And with what happened, the atrocities that were committed after Ahmad al-Shara became the president against the Alawites and then against the Druze who were very courageously protesting against the Assad regime the entire time, who basically did not do anything that would be to incite this type of violence against them. So it was pure sectarian violence and the massacres and atrocities. So you have this new reality that this is basically a fragmented country that the United States wants to see as stable as possible, not to kind of go into more chaotic different regions. And you have Israel's role, like I mentioned earlier, which a lot of people, including, by the way, some Sunnis who are afraid of the Islamists, are very kind of looking towards Israel for more engagement. And you have the Kurds that are concerned right now with the US position on empowering al-Shara, because they know that al-Shara also has some forces within the security forces of Syria who are not only Islamic and jihadists that want to kill the Kurds because they're Kurds, but also because they have the Turkish backed forces there, that they were actually at war with the Kurds based on the Turkish orders. So it's a very complex reality in Syria. In my personal opinion, I do think that we have to not trust, we have to verify, but I do think that engagement is better than the lack of engagement. I think engagement is going to be what will help us direct the situation to go in the right direction rather than let it be in the more of a chaotic and remote place. I think accountability and pressure will be the way to go. I think Israel is applying its pressure, and I think the United States under President Trump is also doing some work in terms of, like, even now, for example, the lifting of sanctions on Syria is being discussed. Now, even if they do it, if they go ahead and do it, they're going to do it in a way where it could snap back based on any violations that would be committed. I want to say something about this type of kind of way of that we're seeing things happen. I want to mention Lebanon. Hussein, you talked a little bit about that, of course, but I want to say, like, yesterday, the Lebanese army arrested Noh Zayter, who is he's a drug lord, who's basically an ally of Hezbollah. And he basically was one of those very protected people. Now, because Israel is applying its pressure, militarily pressure, and the United States government is also not, kind of accepting the Lebanese government and army because they canceled, for example, the head of the Lebanese army was supposed to have meetings in Washington, and that was canceled. Then you see under that pressure by the United States, they arrested this guy. So there are things that are moving. I think this kind of collaboration between Israel and the United States, and of course other US allies, I think this will be the right path forward for this region at this point.
Well, Avi, it's if I will try to sum your perspectives in the context of the Western discussion, I would say that you basically strongly advise Western discussion to be very realistic about assessing the complexities on the ground. And if I understand from you, you're basically talking about a policy, a Western policy that combines understanding of the complexities and taking the measurements that are the right measurements in order to try and to achieve the goals that they want. By the way, in that regard, if I'm not mistaken, just the other day, the United States appointed a new ambassador to Lebanon, which is, to the best of my knowledge, originally from Lebanon. And so I think that this is something very interesting and very significant. At this point, I want to welcome our third guest, Dalia Ziada. Dalia, hi, welcome. Thank you for joining us. We've been talking about Syria, we've been talking about Lebanon, we talked about the challenges of state within a state and militias and the sovereignty or lack of sovereignty of governments. And I think that that will be a great segue to focus on another very significant arena, of course, and this is Gaza Strip. And in the context of Trump peace deal of Gaza Strip, what are the obstacles really when we are looking today at the situation in Gaza Strip? What do we need to understand from a Western perspective that is essential if we want to really understand the situation in Gaza Strip?
Thank you so much, Avi and Hussein and Havi. I'm so happy to be with you. And actually, I've been in the background for a while. I watched all of your discussion, but just for technical difficulties, I had some difficulty logging on. Finally, it's resolved. So you asked a very important question, Avi, because the issue is that when we speak about peace and ceasefire in a situation like Gaza, usually when the speaker is a Westerner, they try to project the Western vision on the situation in Gaza or the situation in the Middle East. I remember in many lectures before you and I were speaking about the irony of the word ceasefire itself. That in English it means something, in Arabic it means a completely different thing. If in English it means a pathway toward this peace, in Arabic, it means only just a temporary pause in the war or in the jihadist mission, hudna, in order to go back and just continue the killing and continue the murder. And this is exactly what Hamas in Gaza is doing right now. They are abusing the ignorance of Western policymakers of their tactics, of their ways of running things, and they are abusing the ceasefire that has been done. And it's, by the way, very fragile ceasefire, as we all know, that has been going on for a few weeks now, not for anything other than building or rebuilding their own troops, their own forces, and once again fostering control over Gaza. The first thing Hamas did as soon as the ceasefire was applied was to go from one clan to the other and kill the people there. And also, let's keep in mind, honestly, these clans are not the most innocent people there. They are also criminals, they are mafia groups, but they are anti-Hamas. So they wanted to make sure that they are under control, they are being mutated somehow, so they do not represent a threat to Hamas in the future. Hamas is claiming that it is going to give power according to the ceasefire, and they are claiming that they are willing to have a new government. They call it the technocrat government. And by the way, this was not even Hamas' suggestion, this technocrat government. It was an Egyptian suggestion, and a suggestion by the Egyptian mukhabarat intelligence, that they came up with this idea that there will be a government on the forefront, and from behind them you can find Hamas, Fatah, or whatever factions still in control. So Hamas right now is hoping to apply a model that takes it back to how it was operating before 2006, before it became on the forefront of the political scene in Gaza, where it continues to control the Gaza Strip without necessarily being in power. It will remain to hold power, but without necessarily holding a political position. And this is the manipulation they are playing right now. And unfortunately, there are some regional powers who are backing them in this, including Qatar, Turkey, and Egypt, even the direct neighbor that has always been relevant in the news about Gaza and been involved in the Gaza issues. So this is one thing. The other thing, if we look from the other side, the Israeli side, there are huge concerns. And the concerns are not only about the future of Hamas inside Gaza, but also about how Arab neighbors are going to act in the new reality of Gaza or within the new reality of Gaza. Although there are direct communication between the Israeli government and the Egyptian government, especially the security establishment in both governments, but still the level of confidence that is needed to achieve any change in the day after in Gaza is not there yet. Israel cannot trust Egypt. Egypt, unfortunately, did not offer anything that makes Israel trusted at this moment. On the contrary, they are just escalating, leaving the border between Sinai and Gaza loose again. This time, the Sinai tribes are not smuggling weapons from under the ground through tunnels, but by drones that crosses the border to the other side and drops weapons on the militants there. So this is one aspect we have to keep in mind, confidence building, but also other actors like Turkey and Pakistan, who are, I call them foreign to the Middle East context, although despite Turkey's proximity, but they are foreign to the Middle East context and the Arab-Israeli conflict. They are trying to find a way to create a military presence inside Gaza that I believe will not only be threatening to Israel and Israel's security, but also to neighboring Arab countries like Egypt and Jordan.
Yes, indeed. I think that in the context of potential involvement of Turkey and Pakistan on the ground in Gaza, I think that the Israeli government basically said it opposed something like that. I want to just to take us to something that happens right now in the last couple of days in the context of the story of Hamas, Gaza, and the Muslim Brotherhood, the modern movement of Hamas. Today, there is a big scandal in the Muslim world over the whole issue of donations that were raised during campaign held by figures or by an NGO that is based in Turkey, if I'm not correct, if I'm not wrong, and it was under the blessing of some very significant scholars or clerics in the Muslim Sunni world that resulted in enormous anger within the Palestinians. Can you tell us a little bit about these big scandals? Because everything is today, when I'm looking at the social media across the world, and Avi, you probably come across that as well, is this, it ignites an enormous anger in the public discussion.
Of course, it's very interesting actually that this came out now, but it's not new. It has been happening forever. People, especially NGOs affiliated to the Muslim Brotherhood, including, by the way, in Western countries like in the United States, they have been collecting money in the name of supporting Gaza for so long, but nobody knows where this money goes. But investigations has shown over time, including a very famous investigation and trial that took place in the United States, it's called the Holy Land Foundation trial, has found that most of this money that's collected in the name of humanitarian support or humanitarian aid in Gaza and similar places of conflict in the Middle East were actually channeled to the hands of terrorist organizations like Hamas. But what happened, especially in this particular case of the Turkish NGO that was recently accused by Hamas, actually the accusation started from Hamas of stealing part of the money. It's kind of an internal conflict within the factions of the Muslim Brotherhood. They expected that this money will be given to certain faction within Hamas, which is the Hamas on the ground, but actually the money was given to the Hamas in Doha. So, and was not then delivered to the Hamas on the ground. So it's a symptom of the division that is now happening in the structure of the Muslim Brotherhood in general. I mean, in the global network of the Muslim Brotherhood, and also in the hierarchy or the vertical structure of Hamas between those who exist in Doha and those who exist on the ground in Gaza.
Yes, I mean, that's a big story. I also heard or came across analysis that argued that within Hamas there is a fraction or power struggle between the Iranian-affiliated camp of Hamas and then the Muslim Brotherhood or Turkish-affiliated camp within Hamas, and that story of the funds that have been raised is also has to do with it. We have about 2 minutes before we conclude, and I actually before the Q&A, and before that, I just want to very shortly to turn back to you, Avi. And to ask you something, but please try to be concise in the answer, because I know that you can talk about it for the next couple of days. One of the things that I come across in my meeting here, in my lectures and so on, people are saying to me, "Tell me something. Don't Arabs or people in the region are afraid to talk?" And I'm saying to them, "Look, when I'm looking at the social media discussion in Arabic, of course, or other languages of the region, my impression is that people are talking." So can you shed a little bit light on that issue, this perspective of the discussion?
Absolutely. And I want to apologize for a lot of the questions that we're not going to have time to answer, but that's why I think the mentorship is great for you, because there's just so much to unpack when it comes to the Middle East. It's a really complex region, and you would definitely need to know the facts, especially because I want to go back to your question, Avi. We're in the war of disinformation. We're basically confronted with massive campaigns of disinformation online. But if you are like Avi and myself and Dalia and Hussein, you are able to basically get plugged into what's happening on social media in the Arabic language, you will see and hear a very, very different and disconnected perspective from what you hear here on college campuses or in just the social media world, or even on traditional media, which is really astonishing. But people in the Middle East and North Africa, specifically in countries, because I want to kind of make a difference. Like I said, it's a very complex region. The countries that were occupied by the Iranian-backed militias and terrorist groups, including Hamas and the Islamic Jihad. So that's Hezbollah, of course, all of the IRGC-backed groups. They have suffered firsthand, and they know exactly what that evil is all about. And I want to tell you, as somebody who myself, I was born and raised in Damascus, Syria, and I've been covering what's going on there for the last 10 years. So I basically want to tell you that a lot more people are speaking out and saying the things that we are saying here to you in the group in a way that was unprecedented, because in this part of the world, it's basically dictatorial regimes, basically dictatorship regimes that have been dominating the news and the information. You have Al Jazeera that has basically been like spreading propaganda for the last more than 2 decades. And all of a sudden you have social media and you have the experiences that people went through, and they witnessed what happened, and they started learning for themselves for the first time. So there are people who are learning about Israel for the first time, for example, learning about what was happening around them. They are seeing the atrocities of what those terrorist groups have been committing, because before traditional media controlled by Arab regimes was not letting them know what's really happening, was actually glorifying terrorist organizations and terrorist groups and even terrorist attacks. So this has basically been a game changer. And I think that's what needs to happen in the West, is for people to know more about the discussions that are happening on the ground in the Middle East and North Africa, in order for the disinformation that is happening here to be reversed. And I think that's where the hope is.
Thank you. Thank you for that. We are reaching the point of the questions, and I'll turn back to Josh to moderate that part. Josh.
Thank you so much. I'm going to try to synthesize a couple of questions here in the interest of time. So there's 2 questions on Syria. The first has to do with Al-Shara al-Julani. Where is your mind at in terms of interpreting the motivations of this gentleman? And what is the primary benefit to American foreign policy in the stabilization of Syria? So again, what are your feelings about Al-Shara, and what is the primary benefits to American foreign policy in the stabilization of Syria?
I think Al-Shara wants to just stay in power. I think that's his motivation at this point. That's all he cares about is for him to stay in power and to become the, new leader, quote unquote, in Syria. And he's willing to say and maybe even, act in a certain way to do so. Now, the issue here is that can you trust what he's saying? I think for us, it should be more of like we need to see the action and we need to see accountability for the atrocities that were committed, and we need to see a complete, new reality on the ground before this could be even considered, right, to be trusted. In terms of Israel, I think Israel is doing its own steps to make sure that these areas are, in northern Israel are being secured, and I think that makes absolute sense because we're still in a phase where we don't know exactly if that is the, he is going to be fulfilling his promises, if he actually did change, if he actually has control over the realities on the ground. But at the same time, I do agree with the US position on engaging because, again, we've had a Syria that was ruled by a dictatorial regime that has been in bed with all these different terrorist organizations for the last number of decades. And now we have an opportunity where we have a government that is a little bit weaker. Now, of course, we have the potential of chaos that could, happen all over this country. I don't think the US wants to see this. I don't think Israel wants to see this. The issue here is that the United States wants to see a more stable region, does not want to have more conflicts, does not have wants to be involved in wars. So because of that, I think that this is actually in line with the interest of the entire region for the people of the region, because without the US engagement, we're also not going to have this force that could use leverage to enforce the stability on top, of course, of what Israel's already doing. And Israel can only do what it can do based on its own interests in the end of the day. And it's, it did basically help topple the Assad regime, but I don't think Israel is interested in being involved in a war in Syria, and it just wants to make sure that these areas are actually secured, that there's not going to be another attempt for a terrorist attack coming from Syria. So I think we are in a place right now where absolutely the engagement is the way to go, but I think that we have to do the cautiously, optimistic and very much verify first before you trust.
Thank you. There's another question regarding Iran. After the American strike on the Iranian nuclear facilities and the subsequent conflict between Israel and Iran, are we thinking there's going to be a lasting cessation of hostilities in the Middle East without an elimination of the Ayatollah regime? And what does the power vacuum look like afterwards? Is it a Qatar moving in, Muslim Brotherhood? I would also add the most recent news about the water crisis in Tehran. So what do we see the future of Iran being given the most recent flare between Israel and Iran?
Who's the question to? You want me to take it?
Hussein, I think take it, Hussein, please.
Sure. Okay. Just, will the Muslim Brotherhood or Qatar take over? That can't happen. Iran is a 70-80% Shia population, so they are Islamists, but they're, Qatar and Turkey will have to stay out of this. Will we see a renewal of war? What we know is that so far, the Iranians are working. They're not trying. They're working on rebuilding their air defenses, importing parts and pieces from China. Now, that does not mean that they have sealed off their skies to Israel if Israel goes into another round of war, but it just means that the Iranians are not going toward peace, so to speak. They haven't removed the enriched uranium from underneath the rebel. I think they'll probably wait out President Trump and wait until they get a more favorable president in the White House. And number three is the point that's still somehow sticking with Israel is their capabilities, their ballistic missile capabilities. They produce and they have a stock. Israel took out some of their capability to produce and some of their stock, but this is still there. And this might still motivate Israel to to go for another round sometime in the future. But Israel, I don't think Israel now is in a hurry to do anything. Israel is just watching Iranians and I think for now the ceasefire will stop. Now, where the Iranians are not stopping is with their proxies. So they are rebuilding Hezbollah as fast as they can. I told you in this conversation that ever since the cessation of hostilities was signed between Lebanon and Israel, Hezbollah has been trying to rearm. And what Israel has done to keep Hezbollah from rearming is that Israel uses what they call the maintenance strikes. So to describe it fast, Israel was at Hezbollah was 10/10. Israel took it down. I'm sorry. Israel took it down to 10/10, and now they're at 4/10. So Israel will need more than the maintenance strikes to get Hezbollah back. So will there be another round with Israel? I don't see it happening right now, but I don't see Iran going to peace either. I think they'll wait out President Trump before they start re-escalating and trying to get back to where they were before the June war.
Thank you so much, Hussein. The next question for you, Dalia. What should our listeners understand about Turkey and Qatar in terms of trustworthiness and the value of their contributions toward the Western idea of peace? After all, Turkey is a member of NATO and Qatar hosts a U.S. airbase, yet they support Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood and clearly want the end of Israel.
That's a great question, and actually reflects the knowledge of the person who asked it. So I salute them for that. It's the most confusing thing when you look at the scene in the Middle East is the situation of Qatar and Turkey. Why? Because they are very clever in playing a duplicitous game that makes them from one side appear like allies to the West, and from the other side they are only pursuing the agenda of the Muslim Brotherhood, which its main goal is to destroy the West and destroy the Western civilization and the liberal democratic system as we know it, including, by the way, not only the Western civilization, we're speaking about countries very far away, but also Israel, which represents the only democracy in the region. And also, as they have always labeled it, the agent of Western imperialism in the Middle East, as the communists labeled it and the Islamists from after them labeled it. So Turkey is a very powerful country, very, very powerful country in the region and also in the Eastern Mediterranean region. Not only because it is a NATO ally, but because it has the second largest army in the NATO, the strongest army in the region, now only rivaled by Israel. No Arab countries can rival the Turkish military or any other country in the region, not only actually the Arab countries. Even Iran, I mean, Pakistan, if we look at the extended Middle East, the greater Middle East, and so Turkey is very powerful in that sense. Turkey also has a cultural impact on the region, especially in North Africa and the Levant region, because of the history of the Ottoman Empire and the exportation of their culture, this Ottoman culture, Turkish culture to these places. So they also have the cultural dominance. This is what makes Turkey very powerful. But does it support the Western values that we are all fighting for, including Arabs like me, Hussein, and Heavy here on the call? Do they support these values? Do they support peace with Israel? Unfortunately, no. Qatar has been hosting the main ideologues of the Muslim Brotherhood and now hosting Hamas and hosting the leading members of the Muslim Brotherhood who fled other Arab countries after being banned, and has been the main sponsor for the Muslim Brotherhood networks and ideology worldwide. This is Qatar. At the same time, it's hosting a military base for the United States and even funding it in order to whitewash or camouflage, let's say, the world to cover on what it is doing with the radical Islamists. Turkey, despite its extreme power and extreme influence, it's ruled by an Islamist leader who did not shy at one moment to say that he supports Hamas with no condition, and that he is providing money to Hamas. He said it. He said it. He's not even hiding it. So this is the situation we are on. We are in. We should not be deceived by Turkey and Qatar showing us the good side, but we have also to look at their other action on the other sides.
Thank you so much, Dalia. For our experts, are there any closing remarks you would like to give to our attendees? Havi, maybe you want to go first. Hussein, Dalia, and then Avi.
Absolutely. I mean, I want you to definitely, I think your interest in the Middle East is really timely and important. I just graduated from my master's degree at Georgetown University, so I know if a lot of you are students or graduating, maybe graduate, undergrad, students, it's a tough environment, specifically when it comes to discussions about the Middle East. So I went into one myself. But that is why I think it's really essential that you arm yourselves with facts about the realities of the Middle East. I think that there's just so much more that is not being discussed, not in American traditional media, not actually on social media for multiple reasons. I want to tell you that we are faced with I was talking about the war of disinformation. It's multi-level layered one. So we can talk about the Al Jazeera itself, basically being a channel that has very, very large funding, that also has a lot of very strong social media arms like AJ Plus. You have the algorithms from apps like TikTok that is controlled by enemy or adversary countries that also are pushing disinformation. There's just a lot that you are navigating right now in this new age of technology. And I think that, educating people about these complex realities and the facts that is not being shown is basically the way forward. And you be empowered by that, because I went through a lot of discussions in my own graduate school, and some of them were very tough, especially if it's coming from a professor that wants to apply their own ideology onto the student, which I think is really unfair. But you have the power to actually ask. I actually had to ask my professor for my graduation for the last class to have all my assignments be regraded by somebody else, until that professor came back to me and was like, I'm sorry, let's talk it over again, because there is some abuse of power that is happening. And I want you to know that you have rights and that you can definitely bring your opinions to the table and command to have safe spaces for you to have these conversations in your universities, but definitely arming yourself with facts is going to be your key to do so.
Thank you. Hussein?
Okay, let me add to what Havi said by saying there are two ways to do this. There's the way that you go with the flow and you see what your peers are doing and what they're saying, and you just do like them. And this is the majority of the population. And this is not all of us. And if you ever decide to become more well-versed about these issues, then knowledge and education is your friend. And once you educate yourself, you stop seeing things like the majority and you become people like us, Dalia, Havi, and myself. We're outside of the tribe. We're not always thinking like the tribe. Sometimes we agree with the tribe. At other times we disagree. But whatever position we take, we usually take it in an educated manner. Unfortunately, social media and the world is turning in such a way that it's not easy. When I first started doing this business, this job in Washington over 20 years ago, people used to invite me to speak on panels, and they'd say, give us 10 to 15 minutes of remarks, and then the session will go to up to 2 hours with 45 minutes of Q&A. This is unheard of now. I was telling this, Dalia and I were at a conference the other day, and I said each one of us got 10 minutes, and sometimes you even get 5, and in 5 minutes you can barely make any point. So what I'm trying to say is that the time and age are not really going in a knowledge-friendly direction. But thank you for coming and spending an hour. I know it's a Sunday for all of us. Keep on pursuing your curiosity, whatever you're pursuing, and never take no or yes for an answer. Just dig things out and up yourself.
Thank you so much, Hussein.
Yeah.
Dalia.
Wow, they actually said all the difficult things, but let me add to this also, it's not easy to study the Middle East. It's not easy at all. And to understand it, you have to pretend you are, I'm sure some of you have some Middle Eastern origins, but you have to also pretend you are a Middle Easterner yourselves to be able to see the Middle East from the Middle Easterner's gaze, which is totally different from the Western gaze. So this is the challenge. Number two, don't give up. Never give up. It's a very complicated area of study, a very complicated region. Believe me, even we don't fully understand everything yet. And the best way to navigate that is to remain optimistic, to know that there is always hope. Don't believe the fact that the bad guys are the ones who are having the louder voices, the extremists, the haters, the people who want destruction and wars. But believe me, I can tell you there are an enormous number of people who want peace and stability in the Middle East. I mean, Middle Easterners who want peace and stability in the Middle East. They do exist. You just need to be optimistic that you will meet them and you will eventually meet them. The third thing is that actually, after having this course, you are on a mission to educate your peers about what you've just received, to educate everyone you meet, because unfortunately, as Heavy pointed out, there is a lot of misinformation in the academic arena about the Middle East, in the media about the Middle East. See who is controlling the narrative today. The groups that are affiliated with extremists like Al Jazeera and others, and even professors funded by Qatar and other groups. So these are the people controlling the narrative of the Middle East right now. Now it's your mission to take over this narrative and help us deliver the message through you by speaking to your colleagues, to everyone you meet about what you're going to learn in this course. And by the way, I saw the fellowship last year and it was really amazing. So I promise you, you will learn something totally different this time than anything you have seen before.
Thank you so much, Dalia. Avi.
Yes, thank you so much all for your wise perspectives. I will just say something like that. Look, we're now 2 years post October 7, and one of the things that is very clear is now there is a very significant player that is involved in the whole story of the region, and particularly the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and this is Western public opinion and Western policymakers. It has become very clear that this is a very proactive player today. It's not any longer sitting on the theater and like acting as an observer. And so that emphasized the need of what my distinguished colleagues just emphasized, the need of education and expanding the knowledge, particularly in time where the discussion, unfortunately, is very much guided by social media and buzzwords and slogans. And let us remember that we are now at the footstep of AI, which is going to make it even much more challenging. And so why is it so significant to have the education? Why is it so significant for Western audience to have that contextualized and nuanced understanding? Because of two major reasons. One, only through an educational context and nuanced understanding, you could really have the ability to positively shape the trajectory of people in the region for both Israelis and Palestinians and Syrians and Lebanese and Gazans and so on and so on. And the other reason is because lacking this educational context and nuanced understanding is actually resulting in a polarization. It's resulting in a discussion that is not constructive. And therefore, it's kind of like, in a way, boomerang on Western societies. And I think that these are two things that we have to take into consideration as understanding why is it so significant to have this nuance and contextualized knowledge. So I definitely encourage you to apply for our fellowship, because this is exactly what we are doing. We are providing these wide perspectives, the context, the people from the region, authentic education from the region, like Dalia and Hussein and Heavy and other speakers that we have in our program. And it's a great opportunity to really, if you particularly want to be an influencer or to be involved in influential work as a leader, that's exactly the right thing you have to do this time, to take this education. So at this point, I'm returning it to you, back to you, Josh.
Thank you kindly to our experts and guests and everyone who attended our program today. If you did not get an answer to your question, please look to our social media feeds for upcoming videos and those of our guests. We still have a few spots left at our upcoming spring fellowship, so if you know interested undergraduate and graduate students and young leaders, please encourage them to apply. Our application window closes soon. Shukran and toda rabba.
Bye-bye.